Michael Williams is a writer, director, cinematographer, and producer known for Osland in 2015 and The Atoning in 2017. The West Point, Mississippi resident started creating short films in 2007 in high school and graduated from the University of Southern Mississippi with a Bachelor of Arts in Film in 2009. Since then, he has created 25 short films, 2 features, and has worked professionally in the film industry since 2007. When he is not working on his own works, he serves as a cinematographer for independent films and runs Shendo Pen Productions, his video production business.
Hey everyone, my name is Michael Williams and I'm a writer, director, and cinematographer from West Point, Mississippi. And today I want to talk about storytelling, but from the perspective of motivation. So to me, the key to telling a good story is motivation. And what I mean by that, there's 2 different versions of motivation that I'm going to talk about. Number 1 being the motivation that propels you to tell stories. And number 2 is the motivation that dictates your creative decisions. And so first I'm going to talk about that latter, the motivation to dictate your creative decisions. So whenever you're making a film or telling a story, even if you're writing a book, I'm going to talk more about filmmaking, but you can apply this to any form of storytelling. And whenever you're creating that story, you're making an endless amount of creative decisions. There's a series of creative decisions, and all of those need to be motivated. And so whether you're doing the script or whether you're shooting the film or you're getting ready for your final cut, there are so many creative decisions in that process that is making the story that you're trying to tell, and it's really changing it or molding it or making it more comprehensible for your audience. So to me, the best films are the ones that have a unified vision, and that unified vision comes from motivation and keeping that in mind. So what does it mean to make a good decision in terms of a creative decision? Well, you need to ask yourself, does this decision support the story, the characters, the themes, or even the intended experience for the audience? And if not, then why? So when I was going through college and film school, I was told every scene in your script or final cut should propel the story. Well, honestly, I think it should go further than that, and I think you should say that every scene, detail, and creative decision that you make should have purpose and support the story. So that's what I mean by motivation. Like, are the decisions you're making motivated by something? Yeah, something can look cool, or you want to do a special camera shot, or have a certain prop in there just because it's for some reason. But if you can't tell me why, and there's no motivation behind it, then you're not telling your story, and you're kind of wasting an opportunity to tell your story. So if you're making a decision and it's not motivated by the right things, you might want to think about it and say, do I need to rework this, or do I need to take it out? So if you need to rework it, make sure that it is supporting it and you are actually creating the story that's the most complete story that you can tell. And so how do you achieve this? To me, you have to think motivation equals the why. So if you're making a decision in your film, and let's say you're on a beach somewhere, and the scene is on the beach, and your character is wearing a 3-piece suit and a clown hat. Why? Does that make sense? No. Maybe the motivation there is that you're just on a beach and it makes sense for them to wear sunglasses and a bathing suit. But if there's a story point for why they need to be wearing something more ridiculous, you need to have thought about that and explain it. Because if you are just presenting things to the audience without a good explanation or good motivation, people are going to get confused, and you're going to miss an opportunity to effectively tell your story. So whether it's a big decision or a small decision, any creative decision you're making throughout the entire process should be motivated by the story that you're trying to tell. And every decision you make is a very vital tool to telling that story, so don't waste it. And so there's different forms of motivation. There's the practical ones, like I mentioned with the beach scenario. And there's actually an example here I'm going to show from the film Driven. So you see this character here, he has a red light on his face. It looks cool, but that's not why there's a red light on his face. There's the practical motivation. So whenever I'm going into a scene and I'm lighting it as a cinematographer, I could throw lights anywhere I want, but if I just throw them anywhere and they don't feel motivated, then it's going to look weird, it's going to look bad, it's not going to feel natural, and the audience is going to be like, what world am I in? This doesn't work. And they're going to be distracted by bad lighting. But let's say you have this character here who has this red light on his face. Well, the reason there's a red light on his face is because right outside the window is a big red neon sign. So this location was very striking. There's a big red neon sign. When they drive up to it, that red light appears. And so we took the motivation from that red neon sign to make sure that it lit our character in the way we wanted. So we added extra red light to say, okay, this red light comes with this neon sign. We show it in the scene. It makes sense. The audience doesn't question it. But it goes further than that. This is a scene where these characters are actually at odds with each other. They're a little frustrated. They're getting angry. They're getting anxious. And so that red light plays into that story. So yes, it's motivated from a practical standpoint. It's motivated from an actual set piece. But that red light, we can use that to tell our story even more. So yes, we're telling someone where they are, what it should look like, but also on a subconscious level, we're telling them these characters are a little angry, they're a little heated, and this red light plays into that. Now, there's another example I want to show. It's from a film called The Dinner Party. So The Dinner Party is a film about some crazy, cannibalistic one-percenters who take prey on the lesser. And they're all very, very uppity, and they're all into art and everything. So when we were talking about how to shoot this film, this is a film that I was a cinematographer for. I didn't write or direct it, but I was a cinematographer working with the director. And we were discussing what's the influence? What are we going to model this film after? How's it going to look? Well, the motivation for that was Baroque paintings. So Baroque paintings are typically, very dark with a very strong single light source. So there's one single light source coming from above or somewhere at a dramatic angle, and everything else is pretty dark. And there's not a lot of, there's not backlight, there's not a lot of key light oftentimes. So it's a very striking image, and we wanted to make the film look like that. For one, yes, it looks pretty, but mainly it supports the story that we're trying to tell because that makes sense for the themes and the characters within this film. And so as you can see with this dinner table scene, it's very much like a Baroque painting. We try to get as close as we can. The background falls off dark, and then there's the practical motivation of a chandelier that we assume is above the table, giving us this nice single light source. And yeah, there's some candles, maybe a little lamp on the side, but primarily that light is motivated from a chandelier that we assume would be over this dining table. But you can put any kind of light up there, but it may not look appropriate. So yes, we made a light that's not technically a chandelier light. It's not coming from a chandelier, but it looks like it is, and we can mold it to create that same soft but contrasty image and quality of light that you get from the Baroque style paintings. So it not only is a practical motivation that makes sense where the audience does not question why this looks like it is, but subconsciously they're feeling like they're in a painting or that things are a little off, because Baroque is very violent oftentimes, and this movie gets very violent. So it makes sense, and it was motivated by the story and the characters to make that style choice. So not all decisions are lighting. I've talked about lighting, but really it's any creative decision you're making, whether it's the scene you're writing or the costumes. And so for costumes, I have an example. My film Ozland is a post-apocalyptic adaptation of The Wizard of Oz, where these two very different characters are the only two people that they know of in the world left, and they're traveling together in this post-apocalyptic world. But there's a little hint of fantasy thrown in when one of them discovers the book, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, and begins to believe that it's gospel. And so the entire film is a character study of these two characters and how they are dealing with this new information that they're getting. One is very much a survivalist, doesn't believe anything, pessimistic. There's no point in having an imagination because all we need to do is survive. The other one doesn't care about any of those things, and he's a very imaginative character, a hopeful character. He wants to believe in something more. That's why he gravitates towards the book. So the first thing you see of these characters are their costumes. You see them on the poster. You see it in the first few frames of the film. And so if you look at their costumes, these are actually designed by the late K.K. Norris, who passed away last year, sadly, but she was an amazing costume designer and fashion designer, and she took these costumes and made sure that she read the script, we had conversations together, we collaborated on what these characters meant, and she put that into every detail of these costumes. And it not only looks appropriate for this post-apocalyptic world, and it's maybe a little more stylized in terms of their haircuts, which we only had so much control over because one of them was in the Air Force, so we had to kind of make that work for us, but it all worked because all of these decisions were motivated by the story and who these characters are. So Leaf is on the left, and he's the more imaginative character. When you learn about him in the film, you realize that he was actually raised by his mother. He had no male figure in his life other than his mother. and his mother taught him to read and believe, and he's much more immature because he's not really had to fend for himself as much. And so the way that he dresses is that everything's very saggy. He has some jewelry that's probably from his mother. His satchel hangs off his side and is very inconvenient. So if he had to run away from someone, he would probably trip and fall because his shoelaces were never tied, his shoes were barely on, and his entire costume embodies who he is as a person. On the contrast, you have Emery on the right, and he has two straps on his backpack that are always cinched up. He has an axe, he has a rope. He's very well put together. His coat is actually an army coat, which presumably could have been his father's. So he's definitely the much more masculine figure because he actually was raised by his father and had no female figure in his life. On the contrast, Leaf is a more feminine, more younger character, and because he was raised by his mother. So every one of those details that are in their costumes was helping tell the story. There's also practical parts of this. They start off very clothed, and throughout the film is supposed to show that they're getting hotter, they're getting drier, they're getting more dehydrated, and so there's an opportunity for them to take off layers. So that was a story point where they could be very clothed, and then as the film gets hotter and we have to portray that it's getting hotter, even though we were filming in sometimes 30-degree weather, we had to make it look like they were getting hot, and the way we did that was, as the story progressed, they pulled off more layers as if they were hot. So there's a practical sense to that, but also it's only these two characters. You need to be able to specifically realize which one is which, so they have very different silhouettes. So even if it's a silhouetted sky, you know which character is which, and that was very important for the audience to register quickly. And plus, like I said, the design makes sense in this world. So there's the practical aspects that there are layers to help us tell the story in terms of the heat, because the heat's a big theme in the film, the distinct silhouettes, and them fitting this world they live in. But like I said, their personality and their backstory is all in their costumes. There's even a small detail when Leaf takes off his jacket that you can tell was pinned together by safety pins, and that could have been his mother did it, or maybe it was Emery who takes care of him as kind of his father figure now. So those are ways that you have practical and non-practical motivation in any minute or even more overt creative decisions that you're making. And so that also goes into the camera. So there's a scene here where this is towards the end of the film in Ozland, where each of these characters their hope has been destroyed. They're very much dealing with their own issues. There's different portions of their hope that has been destroyed because they each have their own trinkets. This book that is maybe not coming true, this audio recorder that is also a sign that Emery was going to find someone else in this world, and it was all a lie. And so they're both dealing with these two issues, and we're using similar shots back to back. One's this way, one's this way. Their screen direction is opposite, but the framing is very much the same throughout all of these shots, and it creates a mirrored effect. And because they are separated, but they're both dealing with something very similar. And in the very last shot, you see that they're actually back to back against a wall, and you see this thing that is dividing them, because in this point in the story, they are divided. They are not on the same page. They are both upset. Their friendship has been tested. Their survival has been tested. And even though they're back to back with the divider in between them, for one of the first times you've really seen that in a movie, they're still close enough to where they can hear each other, and they're just a corner away from each other. So that shot structure was very simple. It's a very simply shot scene, but the way we put it together and the way we shot it tells the story more so than what you see on screen. Because remember, your creative decisions and the story that you're telling is not just in dialogue. It's everything else that can. So all of those creative decisions are important. Yes, sometimes they're simple, they're practical, and maybe very subtle, while sometimes those decisions are more overt and they greatly contribute to the story. But all those decisions do contribute to the story in some way. And so remember, not every motivated decision is profound, but they're all important to tell a complete and cohesive story. So you need to be intentional and mindful with all of your creative decisions. And motivation is your main tool, so remember that, for ensuring that your creative decisions feel intentional, accurate, and supportive. And your audience is going to realize that, and you're going to feel more fulfilled as a storyteller if you remember that. So why is that important? Well, motivation allows the audience to consciously accept and understand the more overt creative decisions while subconsciously accepting and understanding the more covert and subtle details. So whenever you're making a film, there's the idea of the suspension of disbelief. And if your audience is having to keep up with all the details that don't make sense to them and that don't feel natural to the story, they're not going to have that suspension of disbelief. But if you've thought everything out, everything feels very intentional, you can make a very out there film. But if it makes sense because it's motivated, they're going to suspend that suspension of disbelief and focus on your story. So the second form of motivation is the motivation for you as a storyteller to tell your stories. It's not easy. If you're a writer, it's not easy to write a book. If you're a filmmaker, it's not easy to write a script, and it's really not easy to get it made and actually get it out there. There's so many opportunities for you to fail, for you to think you're failing, to give up. It's not easy, so you have to stay motivated. So how do you stay motivated to tell your story? Well, for one, create big and small goals. Yes, you can have that big pie in the sky goal. So for me, I want to be an Oscar nominated director who makes films that are culturally relevant, and I want to make those great films. I want to make the films that I feel like will really impact the world. But that's not happening anytime soon. And if that's the only goal I have, I'm probably going to lose motivation and fail because it's going to seem like I'm never going to get there. So you're more likely to lose that motivation and get discouraged and not achieve that big, seemingly unattainable goal if that's the only goal you're worried about. So create these smaller goals, things that you can, get finished the next week or the next month or the next year. You have these short-term goals that you're meeting, and they're all a step towards your bigger goal. But every time you meet one, you're going to be more motivated, more empowered. And those goals may not be easy. Some of them may be, but once you're achieving those small goals, you're getting closer to your big goal and you're feeling more motivated throughout the process. So don't just have that big goal, have a series of small goals, as even if they seem minute to other people, they're important to you. So for me personally, I'm trying to get my next feature script written. I have one that's written, I want to get it made, but I feel like that might take me a little while longer, so I'm writing a smaller one that maybe I can do before then. That way I can achieve those goals and get to the next step. So you need those milestones to feel accomplished on your journey. So make sure you have those. Also, beware of the imposter syndrome. That is the number one motivation assassin. That's what I want to call it. The motivation assassin is the imposter syndrome. And what that is that you in your head are creative, and you're going to constantly be thinking, I'm not good enough. I am a fraud. People are going to realize that I actually suck at what I do, that I'm not a good writer. I'm not a good filmmaker. It's all going to come in your head at some point, whether you're, whatever kind of creative you are, you're going to have self-doubt. And that self-doubt is going to come from an inner voice inside your head that's going to make you feel like you're an imposter. And it's inevitable through every stage of the process. Whether you're writing, you're shooting, you're editing, you're going to have those moments. So how do you fight it? You've got to push through and prove your ability to yourself and to that internal naysayer that's inside you. Yes, you can prove it to anyone, but if someone says, oh, you're great, why do you think that? If you don't believe it, it doesn't matter what they say because you need to prove it to yourself. So prove it to yourself, and that'll motivate you to keep going. When you do say, you know what, I didn't think I could do this, but I actually feel like I'm accomplishing something, or I feel like I'm doing a good job, and I push through that imposter syndrome. And also remember, you're only as good as your next project. So it's been a few years since I made a feature because I've been focusing on other things. I needed a break from making The Atoning. And so I honestly don't feel like I'm the same filmmaker as I was back then, and I don't feel like I've shown my worth to what I can actually do now. And so I know that I'm not as good, or it doesn't matter what I've done in the past. It matters what I'm doing next. And so that imposter syndrome goes into that too. I have to tell myself, I've got to make this next movie to prove to myself and to everyone else that I can be a better filmmaker. And the biggest thing is I'm proving that to myself. And so how else can you stay motivated to tell your story? Revisit whatever really inspires you. Who are the storytellers, or which of their stories inspire you? So for me, I love underdog film stories, things like Star Wars, Jaws, even Lord of the Rings and Titanic, and those big films that had an impact on me when I was a kid. But the making of those movies was so arduous on the filmmakers that it nearly destroyed them, nearly killed them. George Lucas nearly died and had a heart attack. And their films almost just derailed their career until they were successes. And I love those stories because it reminds me that even if it's very hard, whatever I'm doing, it may not be on the same level as that, but it's still, there's hurdles I'm trying to overcome. And if I can see that other people did it, it inspires me and excites me to make my next film and hopefully it be a success. So revisit those people that inspire you, and also surround yourself with people that inspire you. So make sure that you're surrounding yourself with people that inspire you, or you can infect, or they're very infectious with their creativity or their positivity. Those are the type of things that you need to get yourself in the right brain space and to feel inspired by them, and to really take their energy and share it with yourself and do something great. So, revisit what inspires you, surround yourself with people that inspire you, but also pursue projects that truly excite you. So if you're making a film or writing a book or whatever it is, and you don't love the story, don't do it, because it's a very large commitment. It's going to take a lot of your time, a lot of your effort. You're going to get some gray hairs out of it, and then once it's done, it's there forever. So you want to make sure that you're in it for the long haul. So if you're looking at your stories and you're like, I just don't feel it, Move on to another one that you're passionate about, that you know you have to tell. You have to tell this story, and you literally can't die until the story is told. And those are the types of stories that you should gravitate towards, because those will keep you motivated. Even when it's tough, you know that this story is so important that you have to tell it. So, all in all, remember that if you and your film are motivated, the audience is going to know that, and they're going to appreciate your voice as a storyteller, and they're going to really appreciate your stories. So make sure you're motivated, make sure your choices are motivated, and that you stay very intentional with everything that you do when you're making your creative decisions, because it really does matter.